living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Where will your child go when they get exposed to something in our sex-saturated culture? Hi there, I'm Dr. Carol, and this is Relationship Prescriptions. If you are a parent, a teacher, a church leader, you are probably aware that the culture our children are growing up in today is not the same as the culture we grew up in, or even that young people grew up in even, 10 years ago. Children are exposed to messages around sex and sexuality from a very secular culture much earlier than most of us understand. And the results of that are, not what most of us think is remotely what God would intend. Ann Kerr, my guest today, is doing something about that. Rather than addressing the results way down the line after an individual has been involved in sexual brokenness for a long time, Ann is helping parents create a culture where children can develop the kind of godly understanding that can help them deal with the culture that we are in right from the start. Now, Ann's perspective is not that if you do things right, your kids will be perfect, because, friends, that's not the case. But she is passionate about helping parents and others have the tools they need to create the environment where your child can have an ally. And hold on to that word, an ally. That's what your child needs as they grow up in today's crazy culture. I am so thrilled to connect with my new friend, Ann Kerr. And as you'll hear in our conversation, when we start talking, neither one of us can shut up. There's just so much where our hearts resonate. Ann is the leader of True North Freedom Project, a nonprofit organization specifically helping parents and others begin the needed conversations on sexual topics with each other, with their kids, and with God. A wealth of resources in their online website, talks and other resources to help you be equipped in this area for your children. And I am just so thrilled to share with you my conversation with Ann Kerr about being your child's ally in today's culture. So here is my conversation with Ann Kerr. Well, Ann Kerr, it is such a pleasure and an honor to have you with us on the program today. Thank you for sharing your heart and this time with us.
Well, thank you, Carol. I'm so excited to get to talk with you about all of these important things that just get to the heart of us as human beings and image bearers of God.
Yes. I have to say that when our mutual friend, Catherine Lee, suggested that we connect, I was pleased. And the first time you and I spoke, it's like we couldn't shut up. There was just so much of our hearts that we were sharing. And I know I was blessed. And I just wanted to share that.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was too. So thank you for inviting me here today.
I know that you have been dealing with individuals affected by sexuality and broken sexuality for a long time. That's a big part of what God has called you to do. Let's just start maybe by, can you share a little bit how you first started being drawn to, or how God first brought you into this whole realm?
Well, yeah, I'd be happy to. And, interestingly, it's only been about the last 10 years. I was privileged to get to stay home with my children when they were growing up. And it was when our youngest left for college that I learned about human trafficking and decided to look into it and decided to start volunteering in the Atlanta area in the anti-trafficking efforts there. And a couple years into that, I met a young man who was starting an organization helping women get out of the life of prostitution. And it was called Out of Darkness. And I began to work for him, and we began to help women. And I just saw so much brokenness in their lives. And it it hurt me, and it made me realize that, well, a few things. Recovery is hard, it's long, relapse is common, and just so much woundedness that I saw. And I realized that the men who were perpetrating sex trafficking were broken also, and that they needed a rescue of a different kind. So I just kind of thought, well, I think the Christian church can play a bigger role even beyond helping the victims, which is so important. But in general, it seemed like the church was not talking about anything related to sexuality, and leaving a lot of us, children included, very vulnerable to the pull of culture and the messaging of sexuality that is so prevalent in culture and frankly isn't very God-honoring. So that's when I began to explore the option of starting a nonprofit. True North Freedom Project started in response to what I saw in the anti-trafficking world. And we've been around about 6 years, and we've begun to narrow our focus a little bit. But that's kind of how it all started.
Eh, We know, I think, in this country, we've come to understand that there is some kind of a connection between sexual brokenness and prostitution and porn and all that, and you saw some of that obviously in the broken results. I kind of liken that to an ambulance down at the bottom of the cliff where people get wounded and broken, and there's an ambulance there to help them and pick them up, and that is so crucial. But you are moving farther up the chain. Certainly addressing porn and sex addiction is part of that, but you are going even beyond that. Talk about how you have come to see the need for helping people long before, helping children long before they even get hooked into these addictions and behaviors.
Well, that's right. And frankly, any of us could be drawn to, deviant or destructive forms of sexuality, just because we're all sexual beings and we're wired to notice sexual things and even to feel pleasure from them. So as a ministry, we, over the first 2 or 3 years, tried to reach several different audiences, and we finally kind of landed on parents as our target audience for several reasons. One, most of today's parents grew up in a digital world. So they know firsthand how destructive it can be. And secondly, they're raising children now, and they don't want their children to fall into the same traps. And then I would say thirdly, there just aren't a lot of resources for them. The church in general seems rather silent on issues related to sexuality, whether the struggles with it, the wounding, the sin, or even the beautiful aspects of it, the beauty of sexual intimacy, and how do we get there? How do we find that true oneness in a marriage? So parents, we started talking with them about how they could lead their children, to be basically teaching them how to become an ally to their children in today's culture, that before their children get too old and shame enters in, and they conversations seem to get shut down very quickly. So we thought, wow, what if parents could start normalizing conversations about bodies and even pornography and sex and sexuality earlier, because children are being exposed to things earlier that are very toxic, but also very interesting because they're sexual beings. So that's how the idea for the ally approach came about, and we began presenting to parents, and the things that we were presenting really started resonating with them. And I'll just share one thing that I think really sets our approach apart.
Yes.
And that is compassion.
Mm.
And I love how in the Greek, Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, and he says that the man had compassion on, the man who was lying there, broken, bruised, naked. And the word compassion breaks down into 2 words: calm, which is with, and then passion, which means to feel deeply or to struggle with. And so when you think about that, today's parents, if they can begin to interact with their children with a little more compassion toward sexual things, it means to kind of struggle with them as one sexual being to another. Now, I know most parents don't want to think about their child as a sexual being, but the truth is they are. and they can notice sexual things and feel sexual feelings. It changes as they grow, but children often discover, the pleasure of the soothing that they feel, maybe from touching their genitals, or they can feel aroused often, by seeing something sexual. So for parents to kind of think back, oh yeah, I was once a little boy or girl, and things came into my life that were outside of my control. It might have been something fairly tame, or it might have been something, more traumatic that began to, in a sense, awaken them to the fact that they were a sexual being. So this idea of having empathy, of journeying with, instead of just thinking, oh, well, I'll deliver a talk when this child is 10 or 12 years old. It's more like, no, why don't we create the kind of atmosphere in our home where we can talk about anything, including things about our bodies or about sex, teaching children about how babies are made, when they're 5 or 6 years old, answering all their questions with a short, honest answer. So that's what we're doing. We are going way upstream, and we're trying to help the little boy or girl of today to understand their sexuality a little better, to learn how to steward it well, and to show parents that it's more than just a few talks here or there. It really kind of needs to be a lifestyle.
That really is different than so many kids have experienced. I'm sure that you and I, in our generation, when we were growing up, didn't experience much like that. Even the classic Christian parents' response, okay, when they're 10 or 12, you have the talk, like you mentioned, and okay, you don't uncover private parts of your body until you're married. And, even the positive framework when parents tried to be positive was, this is something you save for marriage, and so on. But they didn't give kids the tools or the environment to address what our culture has come up with. Um, do you know what the ages are that kids are often exposed to pornography now? Are you? I think you may have shared something with that about that with me when we spoke.
Well, I'm sorry I don't have, an actual survey to link to. There are all kinds of surveys out there, though, that in general say something to the effect of it's much younger than parents think.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of children between, the ages of probably 7, 8, 9 are seeing pretty graphic pornography. And it's a lot different than just a naked woman or a naked man and woman together, like a lot of us saw, as children. It can be very destructive. And I mean, I don't want to necessarily plant a lot of fear in the hearts of parents, because it's not just the behavior that we're trying to manage. It's really helping that child embrace a heart for what God designed, which is God designed sex, God designed our bodies, God gave us desires.
Yes.
These are all good things. So yeah, I think a lot of us in our generation did. We tried to, in a sense, promote purity. We were, not that that's bad, but we were focused on one or two things when God has a much bigger picture. So children are seeing things earlier, even over just basic television. They're seeing so much more than we saw as children, or that my children saw. My children are now, 32 and younger, and what their kids will see now is a whole lot different even than what they saw. So as technology increases, the opportunity for evil is only going to increase. And that's why it's important that children have an ally, someone that they can turn to in those moments instead of hide from. Most of us hid in those moments. We hid from shame or fear, or even our own curiosity. We were ashamed of our curiosity. So we're trying to create the kind of environment where children feel free and safe enough to turn to their mom and dad to talk with them about the things that they experience or feel in those moments.
I so appreciate what you said a minute ago, that this is not so much focused on behavior, it's much more about the heart. And isn't that what Jesus is all about in our lives anyway? It's about creating the kind of soul environment where he can relate to us. I mean, because behaviors may change, but that soul connection with God, if that is in place and if that is developed early, that can withstand the changing environment.
Well, yeah, I agree. But we do know that children are going to fail, you know. They're never going to do it perfectly. And I think as a mom, thought, well, if I just do this, this, and this, we're going to have a much greater chance of success. And I think I kind of underestimated or maybe undervalued grace in my own life, you know, because I certainly failed in a lot of these areas. And our children are going to fail, even with our best efforts. But you're right. We do all that we can, and then we leave the rest to God. And of course, when that child gets to be 18 or 20 years old and they're sort of an adult, you know, in the eyes of the country or whatever, they're still going to have a lot of places in their heart that need God's touch. God's going to allow those. He's going to allow some wounding. He's going to allow some emotional pain. He's going to allow some regret, you know, some sorrow, because as an adult, it's going to be really important that they learn even then to keep trusting in God to be their provider. God did wire us for intimacy. And so helping children understand this when they're younger, how to really talk about their emotions, their feelings, where to turn to when they're feeling these, you know, different things. This whole idea of intimacy with God that's not really, I mean, that's a concept that we try to teach to our children, but it's something that they will continue to kind of learn about as they grow. And our sexual desires are kind of a reflection of this, that we desire intimacy. We may or may not get sexual fulfillment, you know, or if we do in a marriage, it might be for a time, but it's not guaranteed over a lifetime. In fact, Jesus didn't get that kind of sexual fulfillment, if you will, that the world promotes. You know,
And
Jesus
yet and yet Jesus was the most fully alive human being ever to walk the earth. And thanks for pushing back on that. And I didn't mean to say that if parents do it right, their children won't fail. We
right.
all will. We all have, and our children will. And part of what you are talking about is creating an environment that kids can come to their parents or whoever when they have come up against something that is confusing or hurtful, or you know, when they have, you know, done or been exposed to something that has been you know, sexually confusing or a failure, if we want to use that word. I'm not sure that's, you know, the ideal word, but whatever, that they have a place where they can go when they meet up with those kinds of things in their own life.
Yes, and isn't that beautiful? That's what we all need. And of course, we know as adults that we have that in Jesus. But you know, parents are kind of a type of Jesus to their children. As their children are little, they learn trust through their parents. And so, trust for a topic as sensitive as sexuality, especially when we know the enemy wants to target that area of that little one's life, because Dan Allender has an amazing quote that I know you've heard too, because we talked about it, but basically it's something like this, that one reason that evil or the enemy targets our sexuality is because he knows that with just a few seconds of an unwanted sexual encounter, he can mar the glory of a person for a lifetime. And of course, we know Jesus redeems and Jesus restores and Jesus can make old things new, and does. But the truth is, our sexuality is a very, very integral, deep, important aspect of being human. And I know when I was a young mom, and certainly when I was a little girl, I didn't understand that because there was a lot of silence around it. So we're trying to kind of break through the silence. Yes, help parents become the one that their children turn to in those moments, maybe when they have messed up or they have failed or they saw something that made them feel guilty.
Right.
Or even just with their questions, you know, they're curious and frankly, they need to understand about their bodies. They need to understand about the changes that will come, the natural desires that go along with it. So for parents to be that resource for their children also, like, you can ask me anything. I'll tell you whatever you need to know.
You
And
yeah.
in an internet world, that's a very important concept because especially as children get older and they start to rely on the internet for their answers, it's just not a safe place for children to get a lot of answers to some of the deepest questions about life. You know, if you want a recipe, fine. But if you want to learn about how your body's wired or how God made you, it's going to be hard to find that safely on the internet.
And they probably will see things on the internet, and they need to know what to do when they see something like
Yes.
that, that they have a place they can come and talk about it. And you talk about the concept of imprinting
Hmm.
that children experience, that we all do. Unpack that for a moment, if you would.
Yeah, that's a really important concept that I think a lot of us don't think about too much. The brain stores memory of significant things, and sexuality is a very significant aspect of being human, as we've already talked about. So it's natural, if especially for early experiences, for the brain to store almost a cookie cutter image, of something. And I'll give you an example. When I was about 11 years old at a sleepover, my friend pulled out a 8 by 10 glossy picture of a naked man and woman together having sex, and I was kind of shocked. I guess we all giggled. I'd never seen anything like that before. And, she put it away and we went on about our business. But I didn't understand why later that image would pop up in my mind again. And I didn't like it. I didn't really want to think about it, but it kept coming back. And so now I realize that that was a natural physiological response in my brain to store that kind of memory. Now, kids are going to have their own similar experiences. I really think maybe, in the Garden of Eden, that was so that, wow, that first image that Adam and Eve saw imprinted.
Right.
And, maybe in a perfect world, it would be your husband or your wife on your wedding night. That would be the image that would imprint. And, oh, how beautiful that would be. But we live in a broken world, and that's just not really, possible for almost all of us. So what will children do in those moments then when they have seen something, or the image keeps coming back and they feel ashamed? And so that's another area that parents can just realize, okay, my child is going to will probably experience something similar to this. One woman even told me it was something she read in a book. That was kind of one of her earliest memories of something sexual. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be a visual image. The enemy's just a liar. And so he comes in and, he tries to distort everything when we know that bodies are good. There's nothing wrong with the human body at all. The desires that we have are good. Sex is good. And so the more parents can help children with these little things along the way, that they will experience most likely. I think the more grounded these kids are going to be, the safer they're going to feel to talk to their parents about other things that come into their path.
I can imagine there might be some parent who's listening to this right now and saying, I messed up so royally sexually in my past. How can I ever have these conversations with my kids? Either, I was promiscuous, or I was into porn for a long time, or, whatever it was. How can I talk to my kid? How would you answer that?
Well, what I would say is to relate to what your child is going through. So give yourself a little bit of grace. Think back to the things that shaped your sexuality along the way. Various things came into your life, most of them outside of your control. And even along the way, you might have made some choices that you now regret. But for you to really be able to compassionately empathize with what your child is going through, you may have to come to terms with a little bit of your own story. Become a little more comfortable with your own story. Become comfortable with the fact that God is a redeeming God. If you still need to find forgiveness, or, if you still need to work on some of these areas, that's okay too. Maybe find a therapist or a counselor to help you. But I wouldn't wait too long, just to try to enter in step by step, maybe using some of the resources that we have on our website, some good books that you can start reading with your children. And also just realize that, Paul talked about the fact that he was the chief of sinners,
Mhm.
and yet God used him so mightily. And if anything, I think it will make you more approachable to your children if you are able to tell them about, not necessarily details about some of your mistakes, but just the fact that you did not do this perfectly. And maybe let go of the expectation that your child is going to do this perfectly, because perfection is not the goal. The goal is for your child to have an intimate relationship with Christ. and even through, some of the areas that maybe are related to sexuality, maybe even some failures.
I think that's an important concept. It reminds me of a 15-year-old girl that I saw in my OBGYN practice a few years ago. She had been raised in church and obviously had been taught that you don't have sex before marriage. And she came to me for her pregnancy.
Mm.
And her mother was there with her, and it was obvious that there had been such a rupture in their relationship as the mother discovered that now her daughter had been having sex and was pregnant. And it was so painful to see. Thankfully, as her pregnancy progressed, their relationship also progressed. But I think what you have just described is important, that the goal is not perfection. Now, we all, I'm sure, as parents, hope certain things for our children. God hopes for certain things for us, and yet He walks with us regardless of what happens along the way. And thank you for pointing out what the goal is.
Well, yeah, and today's kids are more isolated than ever. They may seem like they're more connected, but truly they're very isolated. And technology, sadly, has created a world where it's really easy to put up a facade of everything's fine. But every single boy or girl on this planet has amazing worth because that child is created in the image of God. They have amazing potential. They also have a very deep need for emotional connection. And hopefully that is with a mom or dad. They need to feel secure in their home. And so I think, parents need to understand that their children they're going to try to find that worth somewhere. And for a lot of young men and women, they unfortunately find it in the arms of their boyfriend or girlfriend, or, it's so easy to fall into that. And I did when I was a teenager, and I was ashamed of it even at the time, but it was a very natural progression, I think, just because we are sexual beings. So I think the sooner parents can start to recognize that their children, are sexual beings, that it looks different as they grow. Obviously, a little toddler, it's different when they're 10, 12, or 14. But for a child to feel safe to be able to talk about anything related to their bodies and not to feel ashamed of it, the best way for that to happen is to start earlier. But I say to parents often, start early or start now, wherever you are. Maybe if you haven't been having these conversations, maybe you could start with, to your 12 or 13-year-old, just with conversations like, hey, tell me what it's like to be a 12-year-old today. Start asking questions. And then try not to lecture.
Yes.
Try to listen. And then you'll know better how to pray. And occasionally you will be able to give, hopefully, some advice or a little bit of direction, but you're never going to really win the heart of that child with just lectures or just expectations. That 10 or 12 or 13-year-old child needs emotional connection also. And prayerfully, maybe God can help you create that kind of connection that your child really needs, even starting when they're teenagers.
I remember seeing some studies, Anne, and I can't remember right now the primary author where this came from, but that parents are the most important influence in their children's lives, even all through the teen years, much more so than most parents realize. And although kids and teens, as they grow up, are going to be kind of pushing against that in many ways, that you as a parent are still the most important influence in their life, even if your kids, especially when they reach the teen years, don't want you to know that.
Yes, I would agree. I would say God picked you for your child.
Mm-hmm.
And don't underestimate the power of that. But I also would encourage parents to get on their knees before God and begin to explore, be curious about your own life, about your own sexuality, about stewarding it well wherever you are now. If you're struggling with porn use and you've probably tried over and over and over to, you've asked God to take it away and he hasn't taken it away yet. Or maybe you're married to someone who has been unfaithful or has, objectified people through porn, and it's very hurtful to you. And wherever you are, just realize you're on a journey too. Your sexuality is being shaped even now by the things that you're thinking about, the things that you're chasing after. And God wants to shape it in really good and beautiful ways. And so God has as much for you in this as he does for your children. So don't miss that. Sanctification is a lifelong process. But I would encourage you to try not to go it alone. Find a community where you can really be real and where you can admit your worst mistakes and still be loved. I mean, that's the way we are with God, But he also loves us too much to let us stay in our sin. He wants to move us forward. So, it's a process.
I appreciate you saying what you just did, that God loves you too much to let you stay where you are, that he is after our own growth at whatever point where we'll allow him to do so. And as we kind of bring this in the direction of a close, let me just ask you for a word or two about dealing with younger kids and then about teens. I know we've touched on a few of these things, but let's just kind of focus here. If a parent right now has kids that are maybe still in the preschool years or early elementary years, what might they think about doing as it relates to sexual discipleship for their children?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do share a lot over my blogs, so I'd love for them to at least kind of look through some of my blog posts on truenorthfp.org and just see what might resonate as kind of a good first step. And then I have a book that I absolutely love that we recommend. Well, it's not my book, but it's the title is God Made All of Me, a book to help children protect their bodies. And it's for 2 to 8-year-olds. And I love this book for so many reasons. It's very glorifying to God. It you can just read a word, penis, breast, vagina. For some parents, those are hard words to say. You might need to practice, but it's important that your children hear you say those words and that so they don't feel shame over their body parts. But it's in the context of covering them. We cover our private parts. So the subtitle to God Made All of Me is a book to help children protect their bodies. So this has the main purpose is to help give children words and help them understand, concepts like uncomfortable situations or people that might touch them in inappropriate ways. And I think it also is a great opportunity to talk with children about how, you also don't touch anyone inappropriately in their private parts. And especially as they get a little bit older, and they can understand what that means more. Little ones, it's a little different with little bitty toddlers, but anyway, that's where I recommend you start for little ones. And then we have a few more books as kids get to be, 4, 5, 6 years old, about telling them how babies are made and how amazing that is. And then for teenagers, I guess, one of the best things I could say to parents, we do have a few books on our website for teen boys and teen girls, but I guess I would just say, the world that your teen lives in, sometimes even homeschool teens, it's just, our teens live in a very sexualized culture.
Yes.
Even homeschooled kids can see things and they can be drawn to sexual things. One mom, after hearing that, I have a talk that I give to parents called Allies, Parents and Kids Navigating a Sexualized Culture. And one mom contacted me after one of my talks and said that her daughter was homeschooled and she did have a smartphone. She was 13, and she said, shame on me, we didn't have a filter on the phone, but her daughter came to her in tears and said, Mom, I've broken trust with you and I've been watching people have sex, online. And she said, Anne, I'm so glad I heard your talk, because as she held her sobbing daughter, the words that ran through her head were, be her ally.
Yes.
And it just changed everything about the way that the response went. The dad came into the picture. He was able to share compassionately about a season in his life when he had looked at pornography. So that automatically made his daughter feel not so alone. And then, they talked about what she could do when she was tempted to look at it again. They came up with a list. Well, here's some things you can do. And so they began to give her tools. So rather than shaming and telling her how bad she was and how terrible it was for her, they showed empathy. So just recognize that your children are growing up in a very sexualized culture, depending on, where you live and how much, your child interacts with other children. They also may be around other children who are very exposed to sexualized things. And one therapist told me it's almost like the air they breathe in a lot of school settings and things. Even it's just who's identifying as what now, who's doing what, and they're sharing things over their phones and all, and much more so than I think we can even really comprehend. So try to prayerfully enter into conversations with your child about, tell me about your world, tell me about your friends, and then try not to judge them, and try not to be too quick to have all the answers, because frankly, they don't think that you have the answers. But maybe you can gently show them that you have a lot of love for them and you have a lot of compassion, and you probably do have a few more answers than they realize.
Thank you, Anne, for helping to build fences at the top of the cliff rather than waiting until there's ambulances down at the bottom. It's not that parents can expect to do everything right and protect their kids from every bit of harm. And I hope that you as listeners have heard that. But the picture of being your child's ally as they grow up in this sexualized culture. And it's been a pleasure and a blessing. Thank you for your work and for being on our program here today.
Well, thank you, Carol. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I pray God uses it.
And we will make sure that all the links to your material are in the show notes for this episode, truenorthfp.org. God bless you in your continued work as well as in your own family.
Thank you so much. You too.
Well, friends, I hope that was encouraging. God loves your children even more than you do, and He has blessed them with you. He knows the challenges that you face as you are raising your children, and especially in this area that is so close to the core of who God created us to be and that He cares about so much. It's not so much a black and white, right and wrong conversation, as it is about conversations to help your children grow and understand and know what to do as they face aspects of their growing understanding around sexuality, and that you be the one to guide them, to walk alongside them and be their ally. True North Freedom Project is Anne's organization, truenorthfp.org. You can find that link in this episode's show notes, and I can certainly encourage you to check out their information and connect with them. I know you will be blessed. These topics, friends, are not easy to talk about for most of us. Culture talks about sex and sexuality all the time. We in the body of Christ need to keep talking about it and finding ways to support each other in doing so. Now, as far as having tough conversations, that's something that we deal with in our online community, the Fully Alive group. It doesn't matter how sensitive or challenging the topic is. No topic is off limits in the Fully Alive group. So if you would love to join with other people who are growing in finding the fully alive life that Jesus came to give us in every dimension, physically, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, in some of the tough areas that life presents itself, well, the Fully Alive group is a great place to do so. We have recently completely refurbished our online home. As I like to say, we've updated so many things about our website to make it much more user-friendly and just a whole lot better experience. So I would invite you to come and check us out if you haven't already, and request the free samples of the kind of resources you can experience in the Fully Alive group. You'll find there at fullyalivegroup.com a place to put in your email address. We'll send you absolutely free some sample resources, full-length video sessions that we do every week, some downloadable tip sheets, and so on. and I would love to connect with you that way. fullyalivegroup.com. I also want to say that I love doing question and answer sessions. I'm going to be doing more Q&As here on the podcast. So if you have a topic or a question that you would like to see addressed, you can go to drcarolministries.com/podcast and send me a question or a comment, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you for being part of our online family. And until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.